You are now muted.
I can see it's recording now.
You are no longer muted.
All right. Okay. I think we're recording now. Hi. Good afternoon. Good morning. Good evening. This is Sunny Dua from VMware. Welcome to the vRealize Operations Webinar Series 2016. Today, our topic of discussion would be building self-healing environments with vRealize Operations Manager. And with me, my partner in crime is Simon. Simon works for Extrovert, and we came up together during the Christmas holidays and decided that we'd go ahead and do something exciting apart from what we do on a day-to-day basis, which is our regular jobs, where we'll go ahead and share some of our work which we do on a day-to-day basis with the help of this webinar series. And we basically plan to run this webinar series for the entire year, and it'll be one session per month. And we will probably go ahead and showcase all the use cases, or most of the use cases which we work on, and the ones which are interesting, which can basically help you learn around vRealize operations as a product, but at the same time can help you go ahead and understand various solutions which you can build up with the VMware stack around operations, performance, and capacity management, and share the same. All right. So with that, let me just move on to certain housekeeping items. I hope everybody can hear. If not, then you can just put it on the chat window. We'll have a question and answer session, which we'll try to do it at the end of the entire session when we are done with the presentation decks and the demo. Otherwise, if you have questions which are urgent and you want to basically put them across to us, then feel free to use the chat window, and we'll be happy to answer them over the chat, or I can take up those questions during the presentation and answer them as and when it's relevant. You know that the session is getting recorded. It was there in the original blog post as well. So we will record this session and make sure that you have our recordings up on our blogs, which will be mine and Simon's, and we'll share the URL later on. You're on mute, as I said before as well, and if you have any questions, use the chat window. If you have any technical issues, you can drop a note to my email address right there. Technical issues pertaining to this presentation and not otherwise. And at the same time, please share your feedback if you have any, and we basically shared the survey link along with the session recording through our blog post. All right, with that, I will hand over to Simon. Simon, would you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so Sunny said, I work for Extrovert as a senior consultant. My focus has been very much vROps for the last year or so. Very familiar with the VMware stack, but vROps seems to be the main product that I'm working with, and I'm really enjoying it. So I wanted to share with you guys what we've been learning, what we're seeing. So hopefully this series will be awesome. I hope you'll find it very beneficial. Okay, so what will we cover today? So we'll have a quick look at what's new in 6.1. I'm sure a lot of you who are joining are familiar with the product. If you're not, then this will be a crash course for you. The focus today will be on a self-healing data center and how that's possible with vROps. We'll look at path constraints, the Python adapter, the automation framework, which is basically what makes it all happen. I'll show you a demo, and then we'll have some Q&A. Okay, so what's new in 6.1? So you can see a big list. I'm not going to read it out. If you have a browse through, you can see there's an awful lot of changes, a lot of them very important. I've gone ahead and highlighted what we'll be looking at today, which is the policy-driven automated remediation through the action framework. Some of the other key items that are worth looking at there, the intelligent workload balancing that was introduced in 6.1, also the addition of vSphere SSO for authentication with vROps, which amazingly wasn't introduced until 6.1. So we had LDAP, and we had local authentication in your vCops or vRops instance, but SSO has only just been added, so quite important. And away down the bottom there, you've got endpoint operations. That's quite an important component to 6.1. If you use Hyperic, for instance, that's a feature that will gradually take over the functionality of Hyperic. So we'll move along a bit. So what is a self-healing data center? I'll let you guys read that. To me, it's all about we're all engineers, whether you're a consultant or whether you're operations or in a NOC. You don't want to get paged at 3 in the morning if an app or a VM is running hot and all you have to do is give it a little bit more resources, those kinds of things. Or if you need to provision more RAM, or the opposite to that, let's say you've got a lot of idle VMs that may or may not be consuming too much resources or generating CPU ready. You want these things to be automated if possible. It's never really been easy to do that, but now you can. So, you don't get your page, you'll still get your logs and your emails. It'll say, hey, I did this overnight, are you happy with that? And you can check the logs and see what actually happened. So the past constraints. If you used vCops in the past, the whole self-healing data center bit was something that was suggested, and it was possible, but it required a lot of work. The first component was VCO or vRO, which is Orchestrator. Fantastic product. If you're not familiar with it, I would strongly encourage you to go and take a look at it. Very, very powerful, the way it can integrate with other products. In this instance, with vCops back then, vCops would have to send an SNMP trap to VCO. You'd have to have a plugin added to VCO. You would then have to work with that plugin, configure workflows. It was quite a lot of work. Required SNMP, which in my personal experience isn't a lot of fun to work with, especially if you're having to work out all of the OIDs, break them down, configure workflows based on those OIDs. It's quite a lot of work. As I said there, it's a lot of time to develop and a lot of trial and error. Doesn't always work. If you haven't got the time, it's just not fun to set up. So it was quite a ball ache, really.
Just to add to what Simon just mentioned, the good thing with extra coding is that it can do wonders for you. But sometimes the problem is that when you're looking at moving on from a version X to version Y, then you have quite a bit of a backlog, and I think that's the chained weight over there, which we are talking about, which slows you down because it's not easy to migrate or upgrade from an older version to the new version if you have a lot of custom code going into the product.
Yeah.
So that's where the constraints, I believe. Yep, you're right, Simon.
Yeah. A lot of technical debt can occur there if you get people moving on who have done the development work. So, yeah, it was possible, but it just required an awful lot of effort. So how is it all possible? What's in vRops that's allowing us to do some remediation and automation? There's a fantastic new adapter that's part of the vCenter adapter. It's the vCenter Python Actions adapter. This item you will configure separately from the vCenter adapter. So if you're wanting to get just metrics from vCenter, you can just configure your vCenter adapter. The Python adapter is separate from this. So if you're perhaps new to vRops and you're concerned about, oh, hang on, I don't really want to configure this if it's going to start interfering with my vCenter environment, that's not how it works. It's a separate entity. So you can configure it separately. You can give it separate service accounts if you want. It's completely up to you how you use it in that respect. So very safe, very useful tool. It's included. It was actually included in 6.0, if I remember rightly. But with 6.1, some new strength has been added. Where is it then?
Yep.
So if you're familiar with vRops, you go to your administration panel and in your solutions. Let me just highlight this here. It's not working. There we go. So you've got your vSphere adapter here, or your solution, and over here down. This is what you would configure here, just to connect to vCenter for your metrics. And this fella here is your Python's adapter, which you would also have to configure if you wanted to use remediation and automation. Okay, let's move on. So the automation action framework, this is what it's all about. This is what makes it possible. And while I remember, I'm going to quickly stop the presentation because what I'm going to do now, you can see I've got one VM here running hot. I'm going to start off running these other VMs. The idea behind this is vROps will pick up that these guys are running hot after about 10 or 15 minutes, and they will add additional CPU resources. So you can see clearly here in the task manager at the moment, one CPU is added. The same with this one. This guy here has been running a little while, but he's new, so not a lot's happened just yet. These guys up here are separate, and you'll understand why later, but they are essentially, they've been running hot. I've been running them hot for a long time over the last period, a week or so. What we'll do there is they're not currently a part of the policies or the framework that allows it to be automated. So they'll just carry on thrashing the system until we add it to our group. So there we go. It's a sort of visual representation of what's going on in my environment here in the lab. So let's get back to the slide deck.
So Simon, just to make it more clearer for people who've joined in, and maybe not have a lot of background about the capabilities around the automated action framework. So you're trying to demonstrate there with those VMs is there are VMs which are running hot for a long time, and the automated action framework has done nothing to them, and they're just running on hot, while there are VMs that you just powered on, and the expectation for those VMs is that the automated action framework will go and look at what's happening and why they're running hot, and is there a solution to that particular problem, right?
That's correct, yeah. So they're a part of a group and a part of a custom policy that I've created that will, depending on what's going on the VM, the automation action framework will kick in based on the policy that we've set, and it will say, hey, this particular VM is running very hot. It needs X amount of extra CPU, and it will then suggest that allocation, and because I've configured it correctly, it'll then go ahead and automate that hot adding of a CPU. So what I'll do is I'll just open this all up here. The key thing to remember here is if you don't configure this up, nothing's going to happen to these VMs. You'll get suggestions. You can manually remediate. A lot of the out-of-the-box policies and alerts and actions are there. There are quite a few, actually, out of the box. I've used my own custom ones. And another thing, I'll actually make sure it's clear, the policies I've configured are quite aggressive. So normally, if you configure this, you won't find that a VM will suddenly be given extra VM after 10 or 15 minutes. That's what we're aiming for here, so you guys can see it within this webinar. Traditionally, you'll probably set it a lot easier than that because, you're going to have SQL servers that are busy, Exchange servers that are busy. Really, the use cases around this, as per the slide there, you want to, if you've got a critical app, for instance, and it's running hot, you're expecting certain periods of time when it's busy, but if it's suddenly excessive, let's say it's a website, and you've suddenly had a TV advert, and you've got lots of traffic to your website, it's unexpected or unplanned. You've got the ability to scale up your web VM or your application up quickly, and it'll react on that and say, oh, flip, it's running hot. We need a bit more compute so this website can still function and make money for your business.
Okay, that makes sense. Go ahead.
Okay, no, I was going to say the other thing is one of the questions I've had about this when I've talked about colleagues and customers, it's like, okay, well, where's the logging? You'll be glad to know that there's also a recent tasks page, which I'll show you in a little while, where it'll tell you what it did, how it did it, e.g. whether it was automated or not automated, so did an admin actually do it, and whether it was successful or not, which VM it was applied to. We'll have a look at that in a bit. So if you're concerned about logging, especially when you're automating this kinds of thing, that's all there. What do we got here? Enhance. No, yeah, we can do all of that. So you've got a selection of actions. I'm not going to go all through them today. We might cover that another time. And I believe there is an intention long-term from VMware to give the option of custom actions, but they're a way off from that just yet. And some of the actions, I believe, aren't automable. I think it's the move one, although that may have changed. But things like adding CPU, adding memory, or powering off or powering up VMs is all there already. There we go.
All right, great.
All right, so let's have a look at some use cases. I don't know if you want to chime in as well here, Sonny. For me, it's all about keeping those critical apps running. So as per the example I gave earlier about a critical web app, you know, you've got a lot of traffic. You want that to be running. You don't want that call in the morning from the boss saying, you know, we had an advert last night, the website crashed, you know, what's going on? Aren't you doing your job? Question mark. You know, you don't want to be paged at 3 in the morning because your application's dying. You want to come in the morning and everybody's happy. You just go through your logs and you can see that, you know, the automation framework saved your life last night and saved your job maybe, I don't know.
Yep.
But yeah, it's a good example.
So just an example, I mean, there are quite a lot of cases. So I usually deal with virtual infrastructures where we deploy SAP workloads, and specific to those cases where you would see backups running in the nighttime, and then you would have certain batch jobs running within SAP systems. It's always critical that either they oversize those workloads to make sure that they give them more than what is required, which results in two things. One is the wastage, and the second is the contention, because the more you over-provision as well as more you over-commit on the virtual infrastructure, you might get contention on CPU and memory. So self-healing or automated action framework could be a very good answer to that kind of situation as well, where you size appropriately and do not oversize, but at the same time have an option to go ahead and self-heal or add resources automatically when you think it's a business critical workload and you don't want it to go down. Yep, I absolutely agree to what you said.
Yeah, there are lots of use cases, and I'm sure there are other people out there that will be a lot more creative than this, and it'll be more pertinent to your particular environment. So while our use cases and suggestions are out of our heads, you're probably thinking of different ways of using this for your own environments, whether it's a dev environment or a production environment or a test environment. There are lots of ways and use cases of utilizing this particular product. So what we'll do, we'll go ahead and try the demo. So this should be interesting. I'll say now as a caveat, what I've been trying to aim for is getting this stuff to trigger inside the demo time. I've had a good degree of success, so I'm hoping that we'll get that now. So let's get over to the lab. Okay, so what have we got?
Absolutely.
All right, so refresh the page to see what's going on. Bear in mind that this is my home lab. This is not a lab in a workplace. So at the moment, we go back here, you can see we've got this VM, and this VM labeled hot. Essentially, these are not having any policies applied to them, so no changes are being made to these guys. And I've had them thrashing the CPU for over an hour and a half. This one's been running for 2 hours 48, and this is another hour and a half. This guy here has been running for 8 minutes, so I'm hoping he'll trigger in the next 10 minutes or so. This guy's been running hot for a while, but he's new, so he may or may not get triggered just yet, because one of the things you have to bear in mind with vROps is when you add a new VM, it's going to be using all its effort using, now I'm going to think of a phrase now. Come back to me in a minute. Essentially, it's calculating what's normal for that VM. So if it's been on the environment for a long time, it's going to know what's normal and what's not in terms of usage. Because this particular VM is quite new and it's running hot, it's still not necessarily going to say this VM is underutilized or overutilized. It hasn't got enough data to decide that yet. And this fella here is another fairly old one, which has only been running 9 minutes, and we're hoping this one triggers too. So we'll go over to vROps. So what are the first things we need to look at to make sure that this is all going to work? So we're moving over here to the administration section of vRops, and down here in the global settings, you can see here the automated actions. Now, you don't actually need to enable this. By default, it's on. So if you're planning on playing around with this in your lab or your work lab environment, this isn't a setting that you need to enable, but I'm just showing you where it is. So if you don't want it on, you can switch it off. I will stress, though, that even if that's on, there's a lot of work you have to do to make sure that the automation happens. So you don't need to worry about deploying vRops and suddenly it's screwing around with your infrastructure. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, so it's not that magic button which you turn on and then suddenly self-healing starts. So yeah, it's the gateway or entry point towards self-healing where you first set it up, and then I'm sure you'll run through the other steps in terms of what to do next.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I've done is I've created two policies which are more or less identical. One of them was focused a little bit more on memory. Bear in mind that both of these, so I've named them with this particular naming convention for my own head. You can call them whatever you want. They are based off of this policy, which is the default policy. A quick important note is don't go and edit the default policy. It's not a good idea. So what you want to do when it comes to creating a policy to do this work, use this option up here, add a new policy. It will give you the option to clone from the default policy, and then you can then work on it from there. And when you save it, you've got your new policy, but it still isn't going to do anything. What I'll do is I'll open this up. So you can see here the changes that I've made. All I've done is it's a default policy with some workload anomalies and stress alterations. And I've also modified some bits here. So you can see here, normally it would be a 60-minute peak. I've set it to a 5-minute peak, which is extremely aggressive. You probably won't want to do that in a production environment. Otherwise, you're going to get an alert storm, and no one wants that. This is purely for a lab, so do not copy this in a production environment. And I don't want emails, people telling me, I set it to 5 minutes and everything's falling down. No, please don't. This is for the lab only. I was going to mention about where you apply the policies. So when you create it, you can see here all of the different items that you can apply the policy to. I've created two groups here. You can see critical at group 1 and critical at group 2. So this is critical policy 1, so I've applied it to my group 1. And until you tick that box, that policy is doing nothing. That's an important note there. Okay, we'll jump out of there.
I think a good thing to talk about in this moment would be that policies is not that simple. So that's one of the topics which we have discussed and decided that would be a part of this webinar series. So if you get confused a little bit about policies here, so don't worry. That gives you another reason to come back next month and listen to our policy session, which I believe should be policy next month. So we will try to deep down into that as well and make sure that you can play around with those policies and understand how they can help you with various different functions within vRops. Absolutely.
And if you have any suggestions or areas of vRops that you'd like to know more about, then, send us suggestions or give us some feedback on that. At the end of the day, if you're going to watch this stuff, it's because you're interested in watching it. So if there are certain aspects of vRops that you're really interested in and you want to discover more, then let us know and we'll go for that. Okay, so what we'll do now, we'll have a quick look at the groups. So if you're unfamiliar with vRops or you've not done groups, this is where you go up here. So you've got your environment, custom groups. So I've created groups in here. So I've got one for idle VMs, which is something entirely different from this. And we've got my custom app group or critical app group here. When you click this, you create it, you get all your dashboards for whatever's resident inside here. So to have a quick look at who's a member of this group, you click the analysis tab and you can see here there are 3 VMs that are in there, and you can see that these two fellows are very busy. You can see over a period of time, lots of work's been going on. Across the top, workload, stress is quite an important factor. If you're familiar with vROPs or vCops, a lot of these things will be familiar to you. And as you can see, I've been giving a lot of work recently. So why are we talking about groups? If we're going to be doing automation, you don't want to do it to your whole data center. You're probably going to want to target applications or particular servers or VMs. It's entirely up to you how you create those groups, but you need to, so in terms of a checklist, you need to make sure you've got your global settings and that your automation is done. You need to make sure your policy is set up and configured. Get your group, add the VMs that you're interested in protecting or doing whatever you want to do with. And then once they're in there and you've applied the policy, then as per the policy, you're good to go. There are a few more steps, so we'll have a quick look at that. So what we've gone across here to now is the content, and here are the alert definitions. So what I've gone and done, if I just define this by user, you can see I've added a couple of extra alert definitions here, and I'm going to expand this one because this is the one that's really important today. You can see there's quite a lot of options that you can apply, and when you're creating it, you can give it whatever name you want. You can give it a base object type, so in this case, what we're interested in here is the virtual machine. The alert impact, so in this case, because workload is based on health, and essentially workload is what's happening right now, so that's where, when you're looking across the health badges or the badges in general, health is all about what's happening now. So workload, health goes hand in hand. I've set the criticality to symptom based. These are my symptoms over here. Lots of subtypes here, so it's kind of important that you get this right. So it's virtualization hypervisor performance. And the wait cycles, so what's a cycle? It's 5 minutes in vROPS terms. So if you're going to apply, if you want alerts to be triggered, but you only want them to be triggered after certain periods of time, this is where to do it, essentially. And
Absolutely.
over here, we've got...
It's very important.
Yep.
Just to add to cycles, right? It's very important that you have the right wait cycles and cancel cycles for your alerts, especially wait cycles. So things like workload, for instance, and this can get into a discussion about alerting, but things like CPU workload, etc. If they are cyclical, where they're going up and down in your environment, then you might want to understand that you might have a longer wait cycle to make sure that you get the right alerts, which are more actionable. And yeah,
absolutely.
That's another thing. Yeah.
The important thing here is it's customizable to you. So everybody's production environments, dev environments, and so on are different, and there are different expectations made of you and of the environment. So you know what we're showing here is how to make it customizable. I'm not giving you guidance for your environment. I'm sure you're going to have your own ideas on how you can utilize that, and that's exactly the point here. VMware are giving you the tools to monitor your environment in exactly the way you wish.
Absolutely.
Okay,
I cannot agree more.
Yeah. So we got here where we're adding the symptoms. So what we're interested today is I want to know what's going on my CPU. So the first thing I'm looking at here is I want if any of these objects trigger or any of these alerts trigger, then I want to know what's going on. I'm also doing a check here, is the virtual machine powered off? But I put a little cross here because you can have it, you can click on that. So you can see these are gray, that's because it's not active. So that's basically saying not virtual machine powered off. So that's basically saying, is the virtual machine powered on? It needs to be powered on, is this. And then what will happen, so I'll go to the recommendations now. This is where things get interesting. The recommendation from vROPS, we want to see from this alert, is vROPS recommending that it's going to add CPUs? If that's the case, then as per this recommendation, and we'll go into that in a bit, you can see down here, add more CPUs to this virtual machine, and then the action is set CPU count for VM, and that'll be based on this recommendation here. One quick note, you can have more than one recommendation, and you can have custom recommendations, so let's jump out of here. But if your hot add of CPU is not the first one or the first action in there, it's not going to trigger. So if you've got lots of text in there that's informing an operations guy that they need to do this, that, and the other, and then you tell them, oh, and after this, it's going to be automated. It isn't going to be automated. It needs to be the first one. That's an important note there. So we'll have a quick look at the recommendations here. Yep, go ahead. Sorry, mate.
So if I understand you correctly, Simon, you're saying that if you have 3 recommendations and the first one gets the more priority, and then
yes,
the second one and third one. And if the first one is not the automated action, it will not even perform the automated action. No,
that's correct. It won't fire. Yeah. I don't know why that's the case, but if you want this to work, that's what you need to do. So if you're going to put a paragraph of text in there in the recommendation, put it after the first recommendation. Recommendations can be whatever you want them to be. There are lots of out-of-the-box ones. You can see how they tie into alert definitions over here. So that this is, and you can see here from the screen which ones have actions assigned to them as well. So here is an important one. This is an out-of-the-box one, I might add, and you can click the alert definitions here to see which ones it's actually married to. And this one here is my custom one. You can add whatever you want here.
Yep. Just to add to what you mentioned, Simon. So one thing which we need to understand that, especially for people who worked on vCops or have looked at vCenter alarms, is that with 6.0 and onwards, the alerts are much more smarter as compared to what they were before. Yes, we had smart alerts as a marketing term, but this is more about making them smarter because they're made of symptoms, right? So if you have multiple things happening in your infrastructure, those are all symptoms which can then go ahead and trigger an alert. And just to make it more intelligent, we have recommendations which will go ahead and help your admins to go ahead and do certain things. And if I'm getting you right, you're saying that we are basically, with actions, we are automating those recommendations.
Yes, that's right. So if we look at the actions here, so part of the automation action framework, you can see here, these are the actual bits that can remediate on your environment. So any of you familiar with 6.0 who hasn't had a look at 6.1, or perhaps you've got 6.1, you haven't switched on the automation features, but you've had recommendations, these are the guides that will pop up for the automation bits and pieces. So let's say you have a VM that it's suggesting power it off, or it's saying, hey, by the way, this VM needs more RAM. The stress, it's calculating stress all the time, and it's saying, really, this is consuming all the RAM and it needs more overhead. It'll give you that recommendation, and it'll give you a nice white button, and you can then add the RAM. It'll give you a recommendation on how much it thinks it needs, and sometimes it won't necessarily be in an increment that we're familiar with, but you can add whatever you want. So you could add half a gig or a gig or whatever takes your fancy. As long as you've got it on your host, you can apply it. A couple of other things, actually, while I'm thinking about that. For this to work, I'll quickly flick through this actually on my vCenter client here. So a couple of things with the, you can see here, this one has actually failed, and we'll cover that in a minute. So you can see the automation action has tried to happen here based on this user. We'll look at that in a bit. So all of these VMs have an important feature. So we're going to edit the settings here and the options. This needs to be enabled. I know it's grayed out, might be difficult to see, but you need to have, you don't necessarily have to have both added, but it's up to you, but that needs to be on if you want this to work.
Absolutely.
And the other important factor here is that Windows or whatever OS that you're doing this with needs to support hot adding as well. So if they don't support it and it hot adds a CPU, you're going to have a bad day. And not just the operating system, but also the application. You can remember testing with SQL. Didn't check at the time whether SQL was standard or enterprise, because enterprise supports it. We applied the extra CPUs to the SQL Server, and of course SQL Server just collapsed. So, important things to note. You want it to work, make sure everything in your application or on your VM and the application support that. Some things aren't affected by it, some are, but it's good to know.
Yep. Yeah, with great power comes great responsibility. I think that holds absolutely true for anything which is related to automation, and especially if you're talking about healing your servers with capacity problems, which is essentially what we're trying to do over here.
Yeah. Okay, so what we'll do, we can see that something tried to happen. It's told us that the hot plug operation failed. Why did it fail? So we're going to have a quick look. Before I do that, though, I'm going to quickly add one of those VMs, one of the hot add to this group here. So the VMs that I'm going to be adding to this group, which has all the policies applied to it, they've been running hot for a long time, so hopefully we'll get these to trigger before the end of the webinar. It's always the way with the lab when you're trying to do a demo. Okay, so we'll have a quick look here.
Yeah, we were trying to discuss the labs before we started, and I know we were exactly talking about things like, oh, it's a lab environment, so yeah, sometimes it's always the case that in lab it won't kick in because, of course, there are multiple things running in the background. So now what you've done, Simon, is I can see that there are two VMs which are running hot for a long time, which you showed us on the previous screen. So you've just added them to the same group or the new group, and this group
one of the
already
groups,
having the policy. Okay, and it already has the policy for self-healing to add.
That's correct.
CPUs.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm just going to add the other one to the other group. It's hopefully a way of demonstrating that this will happen fairly quickly. It's been the trick of doing this demo as a whole is to get it to fire when while we're having the webinar, because vRops.
Yeah, I think
with dynamic.
I remember. Yeah, I remember discussing this. So. Yeah, I was saying, Simon, that if you remember, we thought about recording this and putting it out there, but it would have not been fun. I wanted you to work hard. So just make sure that. All right, good stuff.
So what we're going to do now, we're going to have a look at, so going back here, we can see that, where was it, this particular, it tried to reconfigure. So what we'll do is, why didn't it fire? That's an important thing. And this is something I've just discovered fairly recently, guys, so it's good to know. So you're getting a hot tip here. So here we go, it's failed. Why did it fail? So you can see here, it's tried to do the set CPU. The status has failed. You can see it was 11:29. It's now, so that was 10 minutes ago when it tried to do it. You can see which VM it was. If I can drag this across without, there we go. You can see it was an automation item. If it was submitted by an admin, it would not be listed under automated. I wonder if I've got one by an admin here. I don't think I have at the moment. Oh, maybe on page 2, just so you can see the difference there. There we go. So if this was a manual action for setting the CPU, you can see who did it. So you can't have one of your admins going, oh, wasn't me, boss. It's a good way, you know, the logs there can find out exactly who or what did the action. So we can see it's failed here. What's going on? Okay, this is something I've come up against before. So the current CPU on here was 1. It asked for 9. Now, I don't have a vBlock in my garage here. I just have some smaller hosts which are limited to 8. The issue that we're coming up against, which has been escalated already internally, and I'm sure will be fixed soon. What it's doing is it's taking into account the workload, and because these VMs have already been thrashed a lot this week, it's taking into account not just the workload right there, but the constant workload and stress, and it's saying, I really think you need 9 VMs, but what it's not doing is it wasn't taking into account the fact that my hosts only have a maximum of 8 CPUs, so kind of sucky, but it does work. Just as a point of interest here, you can see here I've had hot adding of memory working, so you can see that's worked here. Let's go down here. We can see some more that I've been testing. So one there, recommended 4, and it was happy, and that was on a different VM there earlier in the day, or yesterday or the day before. Where are we? So let's go back and have a look at how these VMs are doing. So we've got hot add. Yep. They might take a little while. See these guys. What you'll also get, and the reason why I've got these task manager windows up, is when the CPU count is dynamically changed by vROps, you'll get a warning message here that will say, oh, the number of CPUs has changed. You'll need to refresh the screen. And that's why I've got this fella up and running. It's not so that you can see what's going on with the CPU. You can see that already. Okay, let's have a look what else we can talk about here. Maybe we can do a couple of questions while we're waiting.
I wanted to add to this basically, from a point of view of how do you actually go ahead. So when you go and approach your environment where you want to go ahead and have self-healing with vROps, so you may be new or you might be running vROps for a long time, but what would be the best approach to go ahead and lay down the foundation of this from a testing perspective? And I know you've talked about making sure that it's supported on the operating system, etc. But it's more around what would be the guidelines around the policies, around the capacity numbers, around the stress numbers specifically for more of a production workload.
Sure. Well, you can define them, but with stress, for instance, we'll go and talk about stress very quickly, and then I'll talk about my approach. So if we go into one of these groups here, stress is a value that is based on anything above 70% usage. So if I, let's select one of these VMs here, and we can see it visually. So here we go. So you can see over a period of a week on an hourly basis when it's red is busy, green is fairly quiet, and so on. And you can see down here what's going on. Stress is your overall long-term, how busy those VMs are, or hosts for that matter, because it's not just VMs that we can look at here. If you're going to look at using self-healing, you really want to start off slow and you want to test it thoroughly. And that will weed out any bugs that you may have. So for instance, because there's quite a few links in the chain to make this work, you know, if you've forgotten to enable hot add, or let's say, because there's lots of flavors of Windows Server out there and things like 2008, which is old but still very popular. You have Server 2008 standard that does not support any hot adding. I think Enterprise supports memory, and datacenter supports memory and CPU. So that, you know, you're working your way through the chains. Make sure the applications that you're using also support this. I think for the most part, so SQL, if it's a large, it'll need to be enterprise. I think you can hot add memory with standard, but don't quote me on that. So yeah, check your applications, do your homework on that, and then you can go to vROps and start considering what you're going to do and why.
Yep. I think some of the actions that you showed us, some of the actions that you were showing, and sorry to interrupt you, were not only about adding resources, they were also around shutting down stuff or taking. Yep. So could you run us through those as well, and probably we can discuss some of the specific use cases around those as well.
Yeah.
From an action standpoint.
Let's jump over to some of the actions here then. So you can power off an idle VM, which will actually be in a recommendation, actually. So if I just type in the word idle here, should get it. Yeah, there we go. So you can see here, this one's quite a useful one. VM is idle and will be shut down, and it's got the action shut down the guest OS for the VM. At the moment, it's not assigned to anything because to do. You might have VMs that are passive for a whole week, and it does workloads over a weekend. Dangerous,
especially in the lab, I guess.
Well, it comes down to you guys understanding your environment. So if you have I don't know, a dev environment, or you have a cluster that has dev boxes on it in a resource or a group, because not everybody has the luxury of separating production and development clusters out. I know that's ideal and best practice and blah, blah, blah. You might not have that luxury. So let's say most of your workload or your batch tasks run over a weekend, but you're doing development on that cluster during the week when things are quiet production-wise. So what you probably want to do is be clever and smart. So you might manually or script shutting those VMs down, but you could also use something like this to power down VMs that are idle. I don't know if there's one for, I'm just thinking of things like CPU ready as well. I think you can base that in the alert definitions. This is a pet peeve of mine. Over-provisioned VMs that aren't doing anything but aren't necessarily classed as idle can be an absolute nightmare for your environment. You'll get a developer that is following the guide to deploy a new application, and the application saying it needs 8 or 16 or 24 CPUs, but because they're not even running it anywhere near in anger, it's not using any of those CPUs, but that'll have a significant impact on your cluster in terms of, or your host for CPU ready. No one needs that drama, and you can configure your alert definitions to look for that. Even if it doesn't automate it, you can pick it out and then go and have a chat with the guy that owns the VM and say, look, this isn't really happening. But if you want to be more aggressive with that, you can automate it and say, right, if this machine isn't shut down before the production cycle on the weekend, it'll get powered down anyway. Or that's another use case there.
Yep, interesting. So I believe while we're looking at those use cases, there are some questions around the similar use cases as well, where a group is asking if his first question is around what is the right metric to be used for memory. Should it be memory consumed or memory active? So I'm assuming it's a double-edged question. One is what is the right metric to monitor it, and the second is if we use memory hot add, then what would be the correct approach? Is it active or consumed? Would you want to answer that?
I think it depends, really, is the answer to that.
Yeah.
When it comes to fine-tuning, I mean, you can see there, I've opened up the alert definition there for the lab test that I've been doing and just testing the actions in general. You can see I've included pretty much everything there because I just wanted, if anything was triggered, do something for me, please.
Yeah.
It really comes down to what's important for the individual and the VM. So if workload isn't an issue and it varies, then you probably don't want that. If you're more concerned about long-term stress on the VMs, if memory's gradually increasing or it's constantly high, but it's not ever hitting the red line, that's where stress is really useful. And the consumed, which is also equal to stress there, that's another way of looking at it as well. So I'm not sure I've got a definitive answer there for you. It's a little bit trial and error. But definitely when you're going into the analysis area, and this really is your friend. Let's go in there again. There we go, analysis. This area really is your friend. If you've got some concerns or you've got particular applications or VMs that those are your babies that you need to keep them running, let's say it's an Exchange server, because, I mean, let's face it, in any business, if Exchange goes down, the phone's ringing before your monitoring system tells you, because people know. You don't really want those phone calls. You want to have an idea beforehand that that's happening. So this is a panel that's really important to you. But you won't need to be here. This is just a way of investigating it. That's why you've got your home dashboards here that will notify you. So you've got your health, which is immediate, and your risk, and then of course your efficiencies on the right-hand side. But I won't delve too much into that. That can be a subject for another time.
Absolutely.
Any other
one
questions?
thing to add to, I have a bunch of them actually. So one thing to add to memory consumed and memory active, from a metric standpoint, active is what the hypervisor is being asked actively for where you're writing those pages. So that is something which is the bare minimum requirement. Consumed is last test pages plus shared plus reservation, etc., and so on and so forth. So basically it's everything. But one thing to keep in mind is memory right sizing is not as simple as CPU right sizing. No. Especially when you're removing stuff. So that's something which you might want to be careful about. And I think when I talk about removing, there's another question around hot remove. I can take that on your behalf as well, wherein we all know that hot remove is probably a case where it's not supported today by any of the operating systems. So we'll not be able to do a hot remove per se, as I mentioned. There was a question which is quite interesting, and probably that's something which Simon you might want to answer. Is what about limits in terms of I'm adding CPU or I'm adding RAM? Is there a way I can put an upper limit or a cap so that I don't go crazy on adding stuff on my system and keep running out of resources in the infrastructure?
Is that from a remediation point of view? When you're going to remediate or automate it?
That's correct.
The answer to that is I don't know, but that's a really great question. If whoever asked that question wants to send me a note somewhere, the best way to get hold of me is on Twitter. So if you don't use it, then maybe my email address as well, which is simon.ed@extrovert.com. I'd be interested to talk to you about that, but I'll need to have a quick look at it because that's actually quite an important and interesting question.
Yep, absolutely. Just to add to that, I mean, there are questions around can we do that with vCO, etc., or is it possible to add automation to perform hot removal using vCO? So hot removal still remains the same thing. I mean, you cannot do a hot removal because most of the operating system, and in fact, VMware also doesn't support that today. So you can't really touch or remove something which is running out of a running VM from a CPU and RAM perspective. The other thing was around.
Sorry,
Simon, you wanted to add to that?
I was just going to say.
I was actually getting to the next question. Go ahead.
When it comes to hot remove, you have to take into account that it's not just the OS or vSphere or anything else that you're thinking about. It's also the application and the information in the memory. So, if you suddenly decide that you want to downsize something from 4 gig to 2 gig, that 2 gig is probably being used for something. And if you suddenly remove it, it's going to kill something. I've not seen anything where that's possible. That would be a shutdown, downsize, and fire it back up again.
Yep, agreed. So I think there is a question which is not related to self-healing, but it's more around concerns about enabling hot add. And if I enable hot add, then there would be some kind of overhead on, especially on the memory side of things. So will that be? So that yes. So I mean, the question is, will that be a wastage because I've enabled hot add and I'm now waiting?
Sure. I know that the only overhead or consideration you need to take is in regards to number. I can't remember exactly what it is. So really, if you're going to enable that, enable it only where you need it. You can enable it in a template and have all your VMs doing it. But I think it has an impact on number and how memory and processors work together. Beyond that, I think there was an article, it was either Duncan Epping or Frank Denneman, I can't remember which one, had done something on that. Again, I can find it for you if you have a quick browse on their sites. I know that they've got an article on it, I just can't remember which one of those guys has it.
Yep. Okay. So we all know that with vSphere 6 as well, you have the vNUMA support for hot add memory. So that's something which, if you're running on vSphere 5.5 and you want to go ahead and have your vNUMA working with hot add, then you need to be on vSphere 6, and that will basically give you better performance as compared to, especially for your monster VMs, which are going over the NUMA boundary or the NUMA architecture which you have on your service.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got some good news here. We've got it to trigger in the lab time. So you can see here on the VM, so this is one of the VMs that was running very, very hot for a fairly lengthy period of time, so 3 hours. You can see here that you're not seeing a reflection here, but you can see suddenly that even though that the CPU thing is running very low, I'll restart the task manager and you can see vROps has added 2 extra processors. So what we'll do is we'll go across to, I'm so glad that triggered in. That's great. Okay, there we go. So you can see some memory's been added to one of the VMs. In fact, 2 of them. In fact, those are the ones that were running hot. And then this fella here, 1-2, so that was about 7 minutes ago or so. So that didn't take very long. That was about 5 or 10 minutes before that kicked in. You can see the task was completed, when it was done or when it started and completed. It was automated. There was no failure. You can see which virtual machine it was. You can see which alert it was against. So one of the things when I was testing this was trying to figure out, which alerts were triggering what. This will tell you exactly which alert did it. So if you've got an alert that's too aggressive and you want to know which one it is, this is a place to check it. You can tell whether it's local, submitted, it's all automated. So there you go, guys. We've got yourselves self-healing. So this VM was running hot, and vROps went along and said, okay, you need 2 extra VMs, and it's happy. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that there. I'm going to go back to the slide deck now because there's no point staring at that anymore. And I think, there we go.
Awesome.
So we'll have a quick review.
I think you were not the one who was hit by that stop poll. You did it.
No, not today.
Great work, Simon. All right.
So we'll do a quick review.
Okay,
you need to use custom groups to assign your VMs. You need to create your own policies. Please avoid using the default policy. Yes, you can edit it. It doesn't mean you should. Custom alert definitions. Your actions need to be assigned to the recommendations. So those are those remediation actions. So if you're going to create recommendations, make sure you assign the action. The recommendation must be the first recommendation. And there we go.
All right.
I forgot any questions.
Fantastic. Yep. All right. I think this is the time for questions. So, guys, if you have any questions and you don't like typing, then I think we have time and we can open it up on your phone as well. So you can just do a *6 and unmute yourself. Otherwise, if you're shy, then you can go ahead and ask a question on the chat window, and we would be happy to take that. I think I fielded most of the questions so far, which awesome. I had on the chat window. There were questions around, will this be recorded? Yes, this is already recorded, and hopefully if we sound good on the recording, then we will post this on our blog posts or on our blogs in a new post within 24 hours, I hope so. And we will basically have the recording up there, and you'll be able to listen to it and go through the entire stuff again, all over again. And probably there were questions around next sessions or requests around by Jan or Jan Eric about policies and supermetrics for storage clusters. So, yep, we do plan sessions on policies, and we do plan sessions on supermetrics, dashboards, etc., so that you can get a scoop of how exactly you can use vROps on a daily basis. So that's something which is already in the plan. Just keep a look I'll keep an eye on the blog posts and our Twitter handles, because we will be trying to share the invite through that, and hopefully it gets to you. Otherwise, you can just subscribe to any of our blogs. So if you want, at this time, Simon, if you want, you can bring up the blog links just in case anybody's interested to note them down. And you would.
Let's have a look here. We'll need to. So we'll go to. What I'll do is I'll navigate here. So this is the blog that I share with a colleague and good friend of mine, Sam McGowan. But also, so if I quickly go in here, you can see this is the article from today, and we also have, so that's going to take me to Twitter. Actually, here we go. You can see this is Sunny, and this here is Sunny's blog, which a lot of you, I'm very sure, are aware of. It's a great blog on everything vCops and vROps and more.
Yep, thank you, Simon. And
I was just going to say one thing.
We'll try to post everything what comes up there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know we're mentioning Twitter, and this is something I've kind of been adding to any talks or discussions I've been having with anybody. If you don't use Twitter and you think it's just a useless social media tool, I would actually argue that I have made it a fantastic tool for keeping in touch with what's going on in the virtualization world or technical world. You don't have to have Twitter and, follow Britney Spears or some other crap like that. I've tailored my Twitter feed to have clever people, you know, virtualization people from VMware and around the world, and you get sort of up-to-the-minute information on what's going on and who's doing what. And it's a great way of learning more about who's who, who's doing what, what's new, blog posts. It's such a great tool, guys. So if you're not using it, please consider it.
I think a good example is that Simon or Yep, go ahead.
Oh, we have.
Who's that?
This is
give your name.
I have a small question. Okay, I don't know, maybe it may be related to this. It's like when we do a hot add of CPU or memory, I've noticed that the VM gets restarted. Is this because of some problem in the VM, or it's a normal process? How does it?
So what VM is it? Windows VM, a Linux VM?
It's a Windows 2008 VM, standard edition.
Okay, standard doesn't support hot adding of CPU or RAM. That would be why.
Oh, all right. Okay, but when it's added, the memory gets added to the server.
Yeah, it will, but it won't like it. That's the point. So if you want to do hot adding of CPU and RAM, you need to make sure that your operating system version can properly support it. And standard edition of 2008 does not do that. So if you just want to add memory, you'll need Enterprise Edition, and for CPU and RAM, you will need Datacenter Edition.
Okay, so you mean to say if Enterprise Edition is there, that problem should not occur?
Sorry, say that again.
You mean to say if it is Enterprise Edition, the issue of restart should not be occurring?
That is correct.
I'm struggling.
That is correct.
Yeah, okay.
So Simon, the question was that if I have the right edition which supports hot add, then we should not face that issue. And that is correct. And essentially that is what we demonstrated today, because Simon has the right edition which supports hot add, and you could see that the VM hot added the CPU and the RAM, both the cases, and it was still running absolutely fine without OE boot. Yep.
Yeah,
I have a couple of other questions.
Go for it.
Yep. Sorry, I was just saying that there was a question around the session was more on hot add on VMs. Can we have more on ESXi hosts? So I'm not sure if I'm able to understand the question around hot add because we would essentially not add anything to the host. But yeah, if you talk about situations where you want to go ahead and limit the workload on the host, then there are things or actions such as shutting down VMs or putting them in a standby mode, etc., can be done. So that's what we saw today. But essentially, from an auto-healing perspective, we are not here to auto-heal the hardware for sure. It's more of auto-heal the virtual machines, essentially, which are riding on or which are basically helping to run those applications. And you want to add to that?
Yeah, hot adding to hardware, that's not what we're talking about here at all. And that's a completely separate discussion. So yeah, that's not what we're about here.
Yeah. So I think there was one more question, and it's off the topic is what Mike mentioned. Mike says that what is the recommended, so with vCROPS 6.1, what is the recommendation for vCenter Platform Services Controller, whether it is external or embedded? So I know it's more of a vCenter question. Do you want to take it?
Again, comes down to your environment. I don't think it has an impact on vROPS, and that's really all I'm going to focus on today, I'm afraid.
You're right. So there's no impact. Yeah. So I mean, just a quick answer to that one. If you have a small environment, you can go with embedded. If you have a large environment, then the recommendation is always for external PSC. And yes, if you want more in terms of design, then it's always recommended that a consultant looks at what your environment and requirements are, basis on which they can go ahead and give you a solution. All right, I have no more questions on the chat window. So
awesome.
If there are any more questions, we have a couple of minutes.
Don't forget, if you have any suggestions or any particular areas of vROPS that you want to talk about, then just let us know. We plan on doing these monthly. We will go ahead and pick subjects if we don't necessarily hear directly back from people, but it'd be great to hear back from people so that we can target it for what people are most interested in. At the end of the day, the customers are, for any product, are important because they're choosing to use a product in a certain way. And it's not always easy to anticipate or guess that if you're using it in unique and new ways.
Absolutely. All right. I think with that, we can go ahead and close this because things are clear on the chat window at this moment, and I don't have anybody talking on the phone as well. So,
okay, great.
So yeah, thank you everyone. As we mentioned, we'll have this cleaned up and posted on our blog posts, and stay tuned on that. And stay tuned for the next invitation, which I'm hoping that we could get out by the second week of Feb. That you can come in and join in the third week Friday, and we can talk about another topic another day. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. See you on the next webinar, I guess.
All right. Thank you.